and welcome to our next grade 11 Life Sciences revision lesson, where we are looking at the process of firstly respiration, and then we're going to look at photosynthesis and respiration together and see how they fit together. So we're consolidating what we've learnt about metabolic processes. Now, respiration is so that we can live, because respiration provides the energy that we need for our hearts to beat, for our brains to function. We get the energy from the food we eat, and the process by which we get the energy out of the food is cellular respiration. And this occurs in the mitochondria of all living cells, plant cells included. All living cells. It's just that plant cells, because they don't move a lot, they don't need to undergo a lot of cellular respiration. So most of the time people don't even think they do it. Okay, for this you need to revise the structure of a mitochondrion from what you did last year with the infoldings or cristae, which have got enzymes on the infoldings so that respiration can occur. Respiration can be divided into two types. The type that we refer to when we just talk about respiration is actually aerobic respiration. Respiration when oxygen is present. And aerobic respiration uses oxygen. It breaks down the food, and the food is the organic food that the plants made during photosynthesis. It breaks that food down, it releases small inorganic molecules, and the important, it releases energy in the form of ATP. So basically, when your cells undergo cellular respiration, they are releasing the energy that the plant put into the food, that the plant got from the sun. So when you get up and walk around, you're actually using a bit of sunlight energy. This is the formula for respiration, and doesn't it look as though there's some similarities here? Into respiration goes glucose. It needs to be broken down to get the energy out of it. To help break it down, we need oxygen. And when the glucose is broken down completely, we end up with carbon dioxide and water. And of course, yay, the ATP. But now, if you look at this, doesn't it look familiar? What did we do in the last lesson? Photosynthesis. And if you look at this process is exactly opposite to photosynthesis. Respiration is the breakdown process to get the energy out, whereas photosynthesis was the building up process, storing energy inside the food. Then there's another type of respiration which occurs in specific organisms, and that's called anaerobic respiration, and an means not, and that occurs when there is no oxygen. And in anaerobic respiration, basically carbohydrates are only partially broken down into smaller organic molecules. Basically, they're broken in half. And that releases a small amount of energy. Not really a lot, but if a cell is about to die, it at least will give it energy so that it doesn't die. So cells, when they're short of oxygen, will do this. There are two main ways we look at anaerobic respiration, and that is in yeast, alcoholic fermentation, making alcohol, baking bread, things like that. So that's yeast breaks down glucose, releasing a small amount of energy and alcohol and carbon dioxide. This is a common experiment. You can see there the yeast is busy bubbling away, and the bubbles are the carbon dioxide. And if you put lime water in here, the lime water will turn milky, showing that it is carbon dioxide. Then another very interesting point is that anaerobic respiration can happen in your muscles. If you are sprinting and you need a lot of energy in a short space of time, and your muscles can't get energy, they will break the glucose, your muscle cells will break the glucose in half, and that produces a substance called lactic acid. But the important thing is a small amount of energy, so you can keep running. Lactic acid is basically a half a glucose molecule, and that lactic acid is not really good for you, so it must be completely broken down as soon as possible. Which is why after you've done a sprint, you stop at the end and you breathe heavily for a while, because you are then providing extra oxygen, which enables your body to break down that lactic acid, and that is called the oxygen debt. Sometimes you find questions which talk about anaerobic respiration and oxygen debt. Let's compare these two processes. Okay, this shows that photosynthesis occurs during the day, and we know that because that is when the sun is out, and carbon dioxide goes in, oxygen goes out, and sugar, food, carbohydrates, is produced. Now, this can be a bit confusing because cellular respiration does occur in plants at night, but it also occurs in plants during the day. But it's just photosynthesis occurs in such greater amount that you don't actually know that the plant is undergoing cellular respiration. So, cellular respiration, same as in animals, oxygen goes in, carbon dioxide goes out, water is used, and sugars are broken down for energy. Let's have a look at, if we look at the organelles, it shows that the chloroplast undergoing photosynthesis, giving off glucose and oxygen, which then gets passed on to the mitochondria, which undergoes cell respiration, giving off CO2 and H2O, which can then be used in the chloroplast again to make food. The important thing is what comes out of the mitochondrion is this chemical energy in the form of ATP. Quite a few questions look at a comparison between photosynthesis and respiration, so you do need to know what goes in and what comes out of each one. You also need to know that whether energy is stored or energy is released. Okay, and here in photosynthesis, sunlight energy is stored, and in respiration, the stored energy is released for use. This picture also shows, in terms of looking at the little atoms, photosynthesis. You take the small carbon dioxides and water, put them together with light energy to form glucose with oxygen. Whereas respiration is exactly the opposite. Glucose and oxygen go into the process, and carbon dioxide and water come out of the process, but of course, important, the energy which is now available for cells to use to keep themselves alive. Very often, you're asked to compare photosynthesis and respiration, and this table shows you where does it occur. That's where. When does it occur? All the time, whereas photosynthesis is in the presence of light. What needs to go into the process and what needs to come out of the process. And you can see here that the two processes are exactly opposite with what goes in and what goes out. This is also important. In photosynthesis, the energy is stored, and in respiration, the energy is released. It also shows that where does the energy come from? In photosynthesis, it comes from light, and in respiration, it comes from the chemical bonds inside the food which are broken down. I think by now, your minds are getting muddled, so let's take a break. Welcome back. I hope your brains are feeling refreshed after your break. Next thing we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at some experiments on respiration. Remember when we did photosynthesis, we did a range of experiments. There are also experiments on respiration. One of the most important ones is checking to see is carbon dioxide given off from respiration, and the most common indicator there is something called lime water, which when oxygen is bubbled through it, it turns milky, it goes white. That's the lime water. Before somebody blows carbon dioxide into it or breathes out into it, and that's what the lime water looks like after carbon dioxide has been bubbled through it. Lime water isn't the only indicator. You can use bromothiamyl blue, you can use bicarbonate indicators, but what they all have in common is they will change color to indicate the presence of carbon dioxide. In the previous picture, it was somebody who exhaled air into the lime water. You can also test for plants. Are plants giving off carbon dioxide? And this is a very, very common one. You use germinating beans, put them on a gauze layer with an indicator here at the bottom. This is the experiment. This we would call the control, because in it we have dead seeds with the same indicator. And after a day or so, look what's happened here. There is a color change. The indicator has changed color. Different indicators will change different colors, but the important thing is there is a color change. Whereas here, no color change indicating that. No carbon dioxide has been released. In other words, respiration has not occurred. A similar experiment can also be done for anaerobic respiration, checking to see if carbon dioxide is given off. Most experiments to do with anaerobic respiration, we use yeast because give it some food and it grows very, very happily. So what has happened here? Oh, why are we putting the yeast in a water bath? Yeast functions best when it is kept warm. So you give it warmth and it will react quickly. The gas it produces passes through this tube and you can see it bubbling out here, and guess what would be in that test tube? One of your indicators, something like lime water, bicarbonate indicator, etc. There are many different ways that experiments can be set up. So you can be given an experiment that looks very different to this, but it will still be testing the same principle. And the important thing here is to know that if it's got lime water, you are testing for the presence of carbon dioxide. Or if it has bicarbonate indicator, you're also testing for the presence of carbon dioxide. Now, what can you expect in the examinations? What types of questions get asked? First of all, you will always have your straightforward recall of knowledge. In other words, have you learnt your work? Do you know the processes? Are you able to label a scheme if you are given a picture of a chloroplast and a mitochondria? Will you be able to fill in, well, this is where carbon dioxide goes, this is where radiant energy goes? Then the next one is understanding. It's more than just learning parrot fashion. It is like, how does this actually work? What is happening in photosynthesis? How is it different to what's happening in respiration? So you must be able to compare the two. Where are they different? Then there will also be application, and these are the questions I know you guys don't like, but there will always be some of them. And in application, you are given a new situation. You could be given something to do with somebody making bread and the yeast rising in a warm room. You didn't make bread at school, but the important thing is you've learnt about anaerobic respiration, so from that knowledge, you should be able to predict the answers to the questions that you have been given. There are always practical skills, and this section is brilliant for practical skills because there's a lot of not only doing experiments, but also experimental results that you could be asked to interpret and explain. So you have to be able to look at a graph or a table and say what's happening. You might even be asked to draw a graph. Or an experiment which you haven't done will be described to you and you have to look at it, and then you've got to work out, okay, well, we did this in class, this is different, and then you use your knowledge to answer the question and predict what will happen. You also need to be able to analyze a described experiment. In other words, you need to be able to identify the variables and, of course, give hypotheses and conclusion. Let's have a look at a couple. Oh, oops, forgot that, sorry. The next one is life science in society. And that is how what we're doing in class links to real life. So that's the importance of the processes to life on Earth. In other words, making food, producing oxygen for us. You might be asked questions on somebody repaying their oxygen debt after they've sprinted 100 meters. And also anaerobic respiration and its use in producing foodstuffs, products for humans to use. Now we can have a look at the practice questions. Okay, so what we have here is an investigation, and you have to look at the apparatus. Okay, there's a poor little mousie. Okay, that's lime water, and what do we know about lime water? It goes milky if carbon dioxide is present. Oh, there's some more lime water. Then, here we have soda lime. And soda lime, like the sodium hydroxide, is important because it absorbs CO2. So it's making sure that any air that is coming in here does not have any CO2 in it. How can we prove that? Well, when it bubbles through the lime water, if there's no CO2, it won't change color. It then sucks into where the animal is, and from that it is sucked into the next lime water. So in other words, having these two lime waters here is actually proving that the carbon dioxide making this lime water milky must have come from the mouse. Let's look at the questions. Which metabolic process? Obviously, aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondrion. We've already talked about what the scientist's aim would be. The soda lime we've already talked about. That's for absorbing the carbon dioxide. Why is there lime water in flask A as well as flask B? We've already discussed that. It is for comparative purposes to prove that the CO2 came from the mouse. Describe the results. That would obviously be the lime water here would turn milky, and the scientist would then conclude that the mouse has undergone cellular respiration and released carbon dioxide. Next one. This time we're looking at photosynthesis, where we are looking at a water plant. In water, the water plant has been placed next to a lamp. In other words, radiant energy is hitting the water plant, and guess what? Bubbles are being given off. So the plant is now photosynthesizing, and we know that because of the bubbles. Okay, what they're doing is they are moving the lamp to different distances to see if that has an effect on how quickly the bubbles are produced. So a possible aim for the investigation would be to see if the amount of light or if the distance of the light affects how fast photosynthesis has occurred. Here, I did warn you, you might be able to draw graphs. Then, from your graph, give a logical conclusion. And you don't even have to draw the graph. You can just look at it. Because when the lamp is far away, the plant is not giving off many bubbles. In other words, very dim light, very little photosynthesis occurs. The dependent and independent variables, remember, independent is what you are changing, which is this one, the distance between the lamp and the plant. And the dependent, what you're measuring, is the number of bubbles. Then, what is the gas in the bubbles? How would you prove this? And the test for oxygen you might have done is using a glowing splint, and if it flares up, the gas is oxygen. Now, this next one, a little bit difficult. Sometimes a chemical in the form of potassium bicarbonate is added to the water. Why would you add a chemical? Think. There's the plant. It's got light. It's got water. What else does it need for photosynthesis? Carbon dioxide. So adding potassium bicarbonate is actually providing the plant with extra carbon dioxide so that carbon dioxide doesn't slow down respiration. In other words, the potassium bicarbonate means that carbon dioxide is not a limiting factor here. Next question, and this is quite an easy one. And here, part of the leaf is in a beaker with caustic potash in it, which also, same as soda lime, absorbs carbon dioxide. Then, before setting up the experiment, they place the plant in a dark place for a day, and that is to de-starch the leaf, which means you make sure at the start of the experiment there's no starch in the leaf, so that if there ends up starch, you do know that it must have come from, or it must have been made during your experiment. The aim would be, is carbon dioxide necessary for photosynthesis? And then the experimental leaf, when it's tested for starch, look at that leaf. What would we think? This top part of the leaf is going to have starch. It's been exposed to the air. The bottom part of the leaf, no starch. because it's had no carbon dioxide. So even though this experiment looks slightly different to what you've done in class, by looking at the picture and working out what's happening, you can work out any experiment. I hope that what we have done will help you a little bit in your understanding of photosynthesis and respiration and how to answer questions associated with that. Bye. See you next time.